It's the country's #1 RVing radio show, sponsored by RVTravel.com, with your host, Alan Warren, the RV Wingman.
And this is the After the Show right here that is streaming worldwide on social media across our YouTube channel and on more than 50 Facebook group pages. This is the most listened to, the most watched, and the most talked about show about the RV lifestyle in the country. Why? Well, because we talk about the good, the sometimes not so good, the occasional downright ugly parts of RVing. I am Alan Warren, the RV Wingman. If you want to follow us on social media, maybe catch the syndicated radio portion of the show, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. So in today's program, we have a special guest. He is so smart and so busy, and we are lucky to have him on with us. We get him about once a month or so. He is the RV lemon lawyer that folks all over the country are talking about, Mr. Ron Burge. Ron, thank you for taking the time to be with us.
You there, Alan?
I'm here. Well,
yeah, I'm here.
There we go.
Well, back on the air.
So I have got a bullet list of topics I want to ask you about. But first,
sure.
For our listeners and viewers, if you would like, if they'd like some more info, they can go to rvlemonlaw.com, right? And use that. That's your website for all kinds of resources.
Yeah, we have a lot on there to try to help people help themselves where they can, and where they can't, our number's there.
Yeah, and folks, if you think you have an RV lemon or you're kind of leaning that way, you just want to learn about them, don't go calling Ron Burge. I mean, you can do that, but you probably, before you do that, go to rvlemonlaw.com and just poke around and take some time and learn, because there's a lot of great information there. So, Ron, my first question is, how's business as an RV lemon lawyer?
It is as busy as ever. I was in South Bend on a case, two cases, matter of fact, just a week ago, and I got to go back next week again.
Wow. And it's getting to be that time of year when you need your snowshoes to go to northern Indiana pretty quick.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, I just bought an electric car so that I won't be burning up quite so much gas.
There you go. Well, listen, I know that you see a lot of people that post on Facebook that are angry at their manufacturers. I want to get your take on something, and not one of those complaints that I ever read about do I hear that the owner seems to accept any responsibility, Ron. It's always that they are just the victim. Do you see the same thing? And what are your thoughts about RVers needing to accept some level of responsibility?
I think you're right about some of that, certainly. I think that there is some responsibility on the buyer to understand what they're doing, just like there is also responsibility on both the seller and the manufacturer to be doing their part right.
So what's this I hear about the Illinois Supreme Court ruled on the side of the RVer? For people that haven't heard, what's the kind of the Reader's Digest version, and how will that affect RVers across the country?
This is a really interesting case. I watched the oral argument in front of the Supreme Court by a friend of mine when he was up there on it. It's really fascinating because this is something that happens all the time, where a buyer gets an RV brand new, and then he's got problems with it, and then the dealer tells him it's got to go back to the factory, and they don't know how long it'll take. And then the factory, they may not know. Oftentimes, they don't know how long it'll take to get everything fixed. And if you don't know you've got a defect in there in the first place when you buy it, what the Supreme Court held was that if you don't know it's defective when you buy it, then you have a right to make them cancel the deal, and you don't have to let them try to repair it. You can jump straight to the take it back and give me back my money.
But what about, this is the Supreme Court. You don't just go to the Supreme Court. I mean, there had to be some lower court rulings or...
Oh, yeah.
Walk me through sort of the short story, if you would. These RVers bought an RV. It had some problems that were not disclosed to them. Is that right?
Yeah, basically what happened was that, like many RVs, when people buy a new RV, sometimes you spot things and sometimes you don't, and sometimes both of those things happen to you. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened to these folks. They bought a new RV, and it had problems, and what particularly started this whole deal off was a leaky roof, which can be disastrous to an RV, of course. Mm-hmm. And there were other leaks that happened, but they let the dealer fix the other leaks or try to fix them. And then when the leaky roof problem happened, the dealer said, we can't fix this one. This is too bad. It's got to go back to the factory. And so they just asked him, well, how long is it going to be? And the dealer didn't know how long it could be out for repairs. So he tried to get an answer out of the factory, and the consumer couldn't get an answer from the factory either. And then it sat there on the lot for a couple of weeks waiting for the factory to come get it. Meanwhile, of course, people are stuck with the payment having to come up and not having what they just paid a lot of money to get, which was RVing time and not RVing repairs.
Mm-hmm.
So they just called the dealer up and said, well, if you can't tell us, then we're going to cancel the deal and we want our money back. And the dealer wouldn't do it. So they ended up suing him, and it went through the trial court, and the trial said, dealership, you win. Consumer, too bad. It went to the Court of Appeals.
Hang on just a second. Hang on, Ron. Hang on just a second. Consumer,
Mm-hmm.
you lose. Dealer, you win. That's what happens most of the time, isn't it?
Well, it depends, actually. It does happen a good bit of time. It happens way too much, frankly.
But it sounds like these people were pretty tenacious and weren't willing to accept defeat.
Oh, they were. They truly were sticking to their guns, and quite often that's what it takes. You got to stick to your guns before you're going to win, because they'll do everything they can to keep you from winning. But they kept fighting, and they finally won in front of the Illinois Supreme Court when the Supreme Court said, no, dealer, you don't have the right to make them let you fix it. Instead, they have the right to cancel the deal because it was defective when they bought it, and they did not buy a defective RV. They thought they were buying one that was not defective.
Okay, so what is the significance of all this? I'm in Texas, you're in Ohio, people are all over the country listening to this interview. What's the significance if you're not in Illinois?
Well, what's really important about this case is that what they were deciding was based on a specific law that basically every state has got. And it's part of what is called the Uniform Commercial Code, and it sets up the rules for buyers and sellers when they're buying and selling personal property. And one of the things it says there is that the buyer has the right to cancel the deal if they buy something and they know about a defect and they expect it to be repaired, and it doesn't get repaired, or if they don't know about the defect that they get in the RV.
This sounds like it could be, a mega win for the consumers, unless I'm...
Well, it is, but it really is. But the interesting thing is it's based on a simple way the law is worded. And every law out there is worded like this. So basically, every state has got this. The key to it is that the buyer here didn't know about the disastrous roof defects. And when they found out, they were willing to let the factory and the dealer try to do a repair, but nobody could tell them when they was going to be done. And then they found out that legally they didn't even have to let them do a repair.
Let me ask you about dealers and manufacturers. One of my opening monologue for the show was about I believe that manufacturers too often get the blame, and the dealer blames the manufacturer. That as I understand it, if I'm a dealer and I take delivery of some products, within 24 hours or 48 at the most, I'm supposed to inspect those units. If there's something visual, something major, I need to make a claim against the manufacturer and report it right away. But I've heard that some sleazy dealers may make some bogus claims to the manufacturer to squeeze money out of them, not make any repairs, and then pass it along to this unsuspecting consumer. Are you following me here? And then the consumer ends up getting mad, and the dealer says, well, it was all the manufacturer's fault, which is not all true.
That is right. And I've seen and heard that story myself before, particularly with one very large Southern California dealership, as well as some others. And part of the problem is some dealers, when the RV arrives, they don't even do an inspection or a PDI. Instead, they wait until they've got a buyer ready to buy, and then they go do the PDI. And by then, it's too late to go back to the factory and say, hey, it arrived here with a bunch of defects. And instead, the dealer has to suck up the cost. And any time a dealer has to choose between paying the bill themselves or trying to pass it off to the consumer, you can pretty well bet which way that's going to go.
Wow. I see that the RV industry does not have franchise agreements as the automotive industry does between their dealers. General Motors will have franchise agreements. And so, in a sense, the industry, it seems like they put themselves in this the situation they're in, they probably 20, 30 years ago could have created these franchise agreements, but they didn't. And now that you've got everything from fabulous dealers that are getting squeezed at every angle all the way up to the sleazy ones that we hear all the time about.
That's true. That's true. And there's a lot of money to be made in the business, and the manufacturers, they just want to sell their RVs. So the reality is that the dealer, if the manufacturer doesn't kowtow to some degree to the dealer will just simply stop selling that brand and go down and buy another brand and sell it.
Right, right. And so everybody wants to sell as many as they can, so it's like a self-feeding problem, and that one day, I guess, hopefully we're helping address it here on the RV Show USA. So what might we be seeing in the future in way of lawsuits? And I've got some other things I want to visit with you about in terms of that relate to this Illinois Supreme Court decision.
Well, what we're probably going to be seeing is that there's going to be more dealers that will be exposed to liability as a result of this court case. This won't give the buyers the ability to go to the factory when they've got a bad RV, but it does give the buyer the ability to go back to the dealer and to make the dealer take back the RV. And that is, of course, the dealer's nightmare. They don't want to have to take one back because they've already made their money.
You mean the dealer might have to actually do a thorough PDI and get the thing ready for the consumer? Oh,
well,
oh no!
Yeah, they might have to do it. You'd think they did it in the first place, but too many times it's not happening.
Well, hopefully this can be a wake-up call to the bad dealers out there. They're not all bad, but there are too many bad ones, and it will be a wake-up call where they'll say, "Oh." But, it seems like sometimes sleazy people will figure out some way to be sleazy no matter what you ask them to do. So,
true. That's true.
So, where should the consumer, I want to know, where should the consumer draw the line between having a real issue in their RV and just being too plain picky? Because I know you've seen people that are just ridiculous or over the top picky, but then you've got the other end. Well, maybe I'll accept it like that. Where do you draw the line?
Well, I think that it is a hard problem because factories and dealers quite often will claim that everything is just too picky, when in reality that isn't true at all. I think what you have to do is you have to look as a practical matter. Is it a big deal or is it not? And a big deal may often depend on the buyer's perspective, more so than on the seller or on the factory, who quite often will look at everything as not being a big deal. In fact, I had one factory expert who grew up in the industry, spent his entire career there, and now he's out doing so-called independent inspections. And he was in a number of my cases. And his rule on it was good enough. If the problem that the consumer complaining about was built or repaired good enough, then that was good enough for the factory, and it didn't matter if it was still bad. That wrong attitude hurts the industry in the long run.
All right, Ron Burge is with us. Ron is with the Burge Law Firm, the nation's most sought-after law firm when it comes to lemon RVs, and nobody knows more about RV lemon law than Ron does, and we are lucky enough to have him with us about once a month or so. So I want you to talk with us about record keeping. How detailed, how picky should we be when it comes to record keeping, Ron?
I think that the buyer has to be, the RV owner, they've got to be really careful about that. They should never get their RV back out of the shop without getting a piece of paper that says what the dealer did with it when they had it. And they have to be very, very careful about the dates that are written on there as when the RV was dropped off and when it was picked up, simply because it's pretty well known in the industry that quite often those dates are not going to be accurate. And that hurts the consumer because if you don't know for sure when you dropped it off and you don't know for sure when it was you picked up, when you're looking at the paperwork 6 months later, you're going to have a hard time convincing the factory that you're right and the paperwork is wrong. So you got to keep what I call a repair diary. This is one of those Murphy's Law deals. As sure as you make good notes yourself of what's going on, you'll never need them. And as sure as you don't, you'll wish to goodness sakes you had.
Yeah, you got that right. So, I read some of these things on Facebook, and I get emails, and some of them they're like thousands of words long. It's like they kill you with all the detail. And
yeah,
and I know you've probably seen the same thing, and I just think that you got to get the dates right. You got to get the reason for going into the shop in the first place, who you spoke with, what they said. Those are the facts, and those are the biggest things. And
Absolutely. All that detail is what gives you the ability to make the factory do what you want to have them do later on. When you don't have that detail of what occurred, who you talked to, the phone calls, and what was said, then you're in a situation where it's just your word against theirs. And then 9 times out of 10 in that circumstance, you might as well go out back and toss a coin because there's no way to predict what will happen.
Got a question. If I have a bad RV, I mean, if I own one of these and it may be a lemon, but I can't afford to go and chase it down. It's just a bad RV, and I want to get rid of it. Can I sell it without any kind of liability to the person I'm selling it to? Should I trade it in? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
You can get rid of it by selling it yourself if you like, and you have to be kind of careful. The general rule on that is that when you're selling something to somebody else in a private sale, nobody's a dealer. You're just you selling it to the guy who walked up and wanted to know how much you would take and whatever. In that kind of a circumstance, the obligation on the seller is you have to answer their questions honestly, and you can't hide anything that you know they would probably want to know about. As long as you do that, then legally, you're pretty well off. You're not going to have a problem. But frankly, it's still your word against theirs. At the end of the day, if you don't write out a real detailed sales agreement, handwritten is good enough, that basically says they are buying it as is and you haven't made any representations or whatever. Another way to approach it is you just simply tell them everything. Give them a copy of the repair paperwork you got, show it to them, tell them everything that ever happened. Problem is, of course, they're not going to want to pay the money they otherwise would have paid. So you get to choose between being honest and forthright about it or letting the buyer run the risk that they don't ask the right question.
But if I have I said if I had a bad RV, okay, then obviously I know that there's some inherent problems with the unit, but there are problems pop up all the time on RVs that I may not even know about. So if I have one that I'm tired of it, I want to sell it, and I sell it to you, and I don't make any warranties or representations. I just tell you the truth, and something major pops up, am I still stuck with some kind of potential liability there because you think that I hid something from you?
That's the problem. It becomes a bit of a contest about whether you did know or didn't know what the problem was that pops up later. You know, the safest way to do that in a private sale is to write out a written agreement that says that you're selling this RV to this person for this much money and that they are buying it as is. And those are the key words. And that you have not made any representations to them about the history, about the reliability, or anything else. You're not making any promises. Here's the RV for this much money. That gives you a good shot at being able to avoid liability. The best way, however, is frankly just to sell it to a dealer. If you sell it to a dealer, they're in the business, so they should know what's good and what's bad about what they're buying used. Also, it puts you as a seller one step away from the next person who buys it, so that person has to go to the dealer, and the dealer has a whole different obligation to their customers from what you as a private person may have when you sell it.
You know, from what I'm hearing from you about this Illinois Supreme Court case, and I'm optimistic, cautiously optimistic, that dealers right now are probably saying we've got to be on our A game. At least we got to step it up, and maybe consumers will get a little bit better treatment. At least their RVs will be looked at a little bit better than they have been previously. I mean, this could be a really monumental benefit, a big win for the RV consumer.
It could be. It could well be. I think it's going to depend on a lot about what consumers actually learn and know and understand and then push to make sure that they're treated right.
What about newbies, Ron? What if I'm a newbie? What do I need to know about RV law before I buy an RV? Because there's so much on the internet. People sometimes get scared. They listen to me. Oh, you scare me from even buying an RV. And I'm not trying to scare anybody. But what do people need to know about RV law?
What the newbie needs to do is they need to check out the dealers that they're looking to buy something from before they ever decide. And then they have to check out the RV, personally inspect it, make sure you know what is and is not wrong. And once you start finding too many things wrong with it, then for God's sakes, get away from it. Don't buy that unit. no matter what is promised to you. And also, if you get ready to buy something and you find things are wrong with it, then make sure you simply don't buy it until those things are fixed. Too many buyers get so excited about it. Dealers call it putting them in ether. They get excited about the buy that they're about to make, and they pretty well take any kind of a story about, we'll fix it when you come back, take it on a trip, and make up a full list of everything that's wrong with it. You don't buy a car that way. So why in the world would people trust a dealer who sells RVs that are a whole lot more expensive to just fix it later on instead of fixing it before I buy it?
We just heard an interview last hour from a guy that said that a friend of his told him that he ought to go down and just test drive a motorhome. Just go test drive one. And that, okay, I'll go test drive one. He said he test drove it. 30 minutes later, out of impulse, he bought a motorhome that was the amount of his mortgage that he owed on his house. And he was completely, I call it being intoxicated, but it is an impulse. It's hard to say no. And because you want that experience of camping and family togetherness, but oh my gosh, it could get you in trouble.
Yeah, they sell the dream of RVing, and it truly is a dream, and it's really a great concept. But they sell the dream before they ever get to selling you the RV. And when they're selling you the RV, boy, once you're in love with it like that, so to speak, you're in the ether. And at that point, you don't know for sure what you're doing, even though you think you do. And they can just put you so deep financially that you can't get out of it.
Yeah, that's why we try to steer people to the right people. There's no perfect human beings, but there are some pretty good dealers, and there's a lot of bad ones. So anyway, hey, if you could change one law that would help RVers, you had your magic wand, Ron Burge, what would it be? What would you do to protect RVers?
There would be a lemon law for RVs that covered everybody. It wouldn't be a matter of it only applies in this state, but not that state. You get rights over here that you don't get over there. There would be a uniform lemon law that simply said, if a RV had this kind of a problem, or this many times in the shop, or this many days out of service, then you had the absolute right to make the factory buy it back or the dealer buy it back. That would make a lot of these bad RVs get built right and then get repaired right in the first place. But you don't have those teeth in the law to help RVs. Do
you think that could ever become a reality, or probably not for the foreseeable future?
I highly doubt it. There's just too much money in the business and too much lobbying going on to make sure that kind of a really strong law doesn't happen. At one point, they were actually trying to pass that kind of a law, and there was a bunch of attorney generals and some industry people that thought it might actually be a good idea, but that died on the vine a long time ago.
Well, it's too bad that it did. Listen, Ron, we got to leave it there. Your website for people to get all their most of their questions answered is what?
RVlemonlaw.com.
All right, we're going to send folks over there. As always, thank you for being there for our show, family. I mean, we appreciate you so much.
Well, thank you, Alan, and I'm awfully good that I'm glad to see that you're back in the saddle.
Oh, me too. Hey, by the way, that the steakhouse you told me about, the Corn Dance Tavern near Elkhart.
Isn't that good?
Fabulous. I mean, fabulous. The little
really
place.
Is good.
Yeah, it was great. So anyway, thank you so much. We'll catch you again soon.
You're welcome. Bye for now.
All right, adios. You know what, folks? Ron is so dang smart. He is always so helpful, and we're mighty lucky to have him as a friend. I will say that while most RVs will need some tweaking from the factory, most are not lemon RVs, not by a long shot. I think too much is made about lemon RVs. Honestly, I think that some of that misconception could be fall at my feet. The reality is that manufacturers are being pressured to produce the best RVs that they can possibly produce. And RV consumers, that's you and me, well, we expect to know our responsibilities. We are expected to know our responsibilities as owners now as much as ever. I always say that you are not only buying an RV, but you are buying the RV dealer that you purchase from. If you have any doubts about the RV dealer that you're talking with, do not buy from them. I don't care what they offer you. Don't buy from them. There are some mighty good dealers in this country, and our job, my job, is to try and connect you with them. Until next time, I'm Alan Warren, the RV Wingman, reminding you, be safe, have fun, play nice, and don't leave your good manners at home. So long, everybody.